어. 데마스커스
Damascus. Mosaic. Decisive.
please pray for those people who are in Korea right now, and pray for Pastor Gozan, because their family is coming back to state this week. In a situation like this, coronavirus, I want to pray that our family will be safe from this virus. Let's pray for each other's health, and that this virus will be end, so that we can come together to worship. The text for today is Romans chapter 7, verse 13 to 25. Let's read it together. Today's text is very hard to understand, and it is very complicated. Among intellectuals in the 20th century, Bertrand Russell was a scholar constantly influenced in various fields such as philosophy, mathematics, science, history, education, and ethics. One of his books that still influences the church's foundation is Why I'm Not a Christian. The content of this book is very clumsy, but if I need to put in one sentence, it is: there is still injustice in this world which God created, and those Christians who believe in God still do evil things. Therefore, I can't believe that there is God whom Christians believe. Indeed, Russell's claim had unknowingly affected many people, and it became a basis for criticizing the modern church today. People that trust like pastor had a sexual and material denial of competence, and they were successful pastors. And their finance, a ministry that does not care for marginalized people. People say that the church has already lost the role of light and the salt, and they criticize the church. Not only that, the Christians who are attending the church leave the church saying like, I believe the pastor, but I didn't know he was like that. Can church do such things? As a pastor, I humbly accept their criticism, but I would like to tell them that there is something that should be avoided for their misunderstanding. In particular, I would like to ask to those who say that they are faithful, but they no longer want to go to church because of the corruption of the church. I want to ask this question. After you became a Christian, did your desire to sin from the heart cease? After thoroughly praying and training, did all greed disappear from your heart and reach to the stage of not sinning without any restrictions? I think if they are able to answer to this question first, then they can criticize with the right attitude. In Korea, there was time this song has been popular. The part of lyrics is like this. There is so much of me inside of me. So there's no place for you to rest in me. I have vain wishes in my heart, so there is no place for you to rest. The darkness that I cannot control is in me, and it is taking your place to rest. My inside looks like a lush thorny forest that has much sadness. Just to think about the lyrics, I can feel complicated and subtle minds. If this song was popular, then it was because many people may have some kind of sympathy with it. By the way, in today's text, there are some descriptions that are very similar to this song. Let's read Romans chapter 7 verse 18 to 19 together. It is very complicated. But scholars seems to be almost unified in this Romans chapter 7 verse 13 to 25 that when Paul says I in it, it is Paul's confession of his inner self. However, there's the problem. When was the time that he asked this question? When was the time that he confessed this inner self? If he confessed like this before he met Jesus in Damascus, then it would be a blessing. We will be impressed that the Lord met a man with such complicated and evil inner side and made him without any error a mature person. But what if Paul's confessing of his inner side is not a short time after he believed in Jesus, but at the point where everyone respected him as an apostle? Then this is shock. So today's text has three interpretations of who is I by the scholars. First, there are people claiming that this can be confessed by believers. They claim that it can never be a confession of faith or signed by a Christian. On the other hand, there are people claiming that this is clearly a confession of a mutual believer. Douglas Moo, who is the world's leading authority in the extant Romance commentary, he claims to be he claims that this is a confession of an unbelievers. He says that Paul is expressing the situation of the Jews with Christian understanding and living under the Mosaic law like himself. The verse that he used to claim that it cannot be confession of a born-again believer is Romans chapter 7, verse 14. For we know, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am a flesh sold into bondage of sin. Moo claims that it cannot be a confession of believers because verse 14 says that I am a flesh sold into bondage of sin. How can a believer recognize his identity as being sold under sin? The second, it is the argument against Douglas Moo. The most convincing scholar is Charles Cranfield. The inner description of Romans chapter 7 vividly describes the inner conflict that is the hallmark of a true Christian. The key verse is chapter 7, verse 22. For I joyfully concur with the law of God in the inner man. So Charles Cranfield asks, how can unbelievers enjoy God's law? So this conflict is a conflict that can only be experienced by a believer whose spirit is active in them and his heart is renewed under the light of the Holy Spirit. Therefore, this is confession of believers. The third claim is by Martin Lloyd-Jones. He said that first and second claims are wrong. How can a confessional believer still confess that he is still a slave to sin and obsessed with sin? On the other hand, how can we say that enemy of God who is unborn Christian rejoice in the law of God? Both are impossible. In the meantime, the I in the Romans chapter 7 described by Paul is not Paul himself, but rather it is a person who appears for a moment in the revival period. He says that Paul presupposes and explains a person who is strongly condemned to be a sinner by the power of the Holy Spirit, but at the same time he has not yet been born again, and he wants to keep the law with his own power, but he is in temporary state that he does not fully understand the gospel. What do you think? determine the nature of the text and nature of your life of faith. Let's think carefully. I struggled with this issue over 30 years. When I first came across with this issue, I was in high school. I was listening to this Christian album, and one of the lyrics is like this. The lyrics says that when I lose my strength by mistake, when I'm tired and exhausted, when I'm disappointed in myself and my head is dropped, when I lose energy by repeated mistakes, when I'm not confident enough to even pray anymore. God, why did you make me so fragile and makes me feel discouraged? And God said, I have begun to do good in you, and I will also fulfill them. Do not be discouraged. I will fulfill your soul. It was clear to me. God wakes me up and starts doing good in me. So the forces of sin that dark weighed me down. That is Christian. Then while studying the New Testament in the seminary, I came across Douglas Moore's writing, and his claim was correct. He says that it is strange that Paul says that Christians were liberated from sin before chapter 7, and in chapter 7 he says that they were bound under sin. Therefore, he's talking about unbeliever. Then after graduating from seminary, I read Martin Lloyd Johnson's writing and received a lot of grace through it. After reading it, his claim was also true, and neither of them make any sense. I went back and forth like that. Then do I preach without being established? No, I'm back in the original state. I believe that this is a mutual Christian's confession by Paul discovering the sin that was working in his simple body, declares publicly and confessing to all the believers that all Christians, like Paul, must fight the sin from the inside and give their body to God as a weapon of righteousness. There is a reason why I'm so sure of this. First of all, if you look at Romans chapter 7, the subject I appears more than 30 times in today's text, and the word I appears more than 40 times in Romans whole chapter 7. How can someone say some of I can be identified as Paul himself and some as fictional characters when there are this many I in it? In any other episodes did Paul ever describe the problem of law, sin, and salvation by assuming a fictional character other than I, who directly points to himself? None. So if you look at Martin Lloyd Jones' sermons, which explains and assumes a fictional character who is still condemned by the law, but who has not yet been born again, you will be confused. Also, we saw the words of Romans chapter 7, verse 7 to 12 last time. The verb tense was predominantly past tense. But verse 14 to 25, which today's text, it says that my inner man rejoice in the word of God. And for the good that I want, I do not do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. It is using present tense in it. Isn't this telling us that Paul is talking about his current state of encounter with Christ? And there's one more decisive thing. What has Paul explained so far? Take a look at the context. Romans 6:1 says, "Are we to continue in sin so that grace may increase? May it never be." Also, in 6:15, it says, "Shall we sin because we are not under law but under grace? May it never be." What is Paul explaining now? Christians who have died for sin and have risen to righteousness and life by being baptized in union with Christ do not give your body to sin as weapon of sin, but give it as a weapon of righteousness to God. Isn't that saying we have to fight sin? By the way, what is defined as sin by law? So moving on to Romans chapter 7, and in verse 7, it says, "Is the law sin? May it never be." In the light of the law, does that mean that the law is evil because you know what it is and that you are guilty and that you have died? No, it can't be. Why would Paul say that then? When we study Romans chapter 1, the list of sins in Romans chapter 1 comes from the law. We are saved by faith, and it is not matter of the law that we are still defined as sinner before the law, but because we have a problem. The very problem is now explained in Romans chapter 7 by Paul showing his inner side of him. Suppose there are 10 people in a cave. They do not know what's outside of the cave, but a man boldly went out of the cave. It was a cliff. He was pulled by gravity and fell down. Then what do other 9 people think? They will think, I will fall if I go out. Likewise, if Paul frankly took out and showed the story of his inner side, then we should know that it is also who we are. Now let's see what text is telling us. First, it is about the relation between the law and me. Let's read a key verse, which are Romans chapter 7, verse 13 and 14. Before the law, even though he became a Christian, he is still a sinner and cannot escape death. So he is asking if it was the law that killed him or the law was a murderer. No, it isn't. The law is like a guideboard or a milestone telling us what the right way is. However, there is no power for law to lead us on to the right path. The law did not kill us, but it did not empower us to overcome sin either. Even before meeting Christ, Paul knew that the law was good. By the way, what was Paul's perception of the law at that time? The clearest verse are Philippians chapter 3, verse 4 to 6. Let's read verse 6 only. As to the righteousness which is in the law, found blameless. He says that he has kept all the laws and lived without any flaws. He thought that as long as he obeyed the external regulation of the law, he could consider himself as righteousness.